We were dealing with our racist state government that had been shortchanging our public schools for decades. And we were under the No Child Left Behind regime. What? Remember that? Oh my God. Is it still here? I don't know. Who knows? Just kidding. Where high pressure, high stakes, standardized testing was there to sort, to label our students and our schools as failures. And failures, right? And then they were there to blame our quote-unquote underachievement on our schools, even though we were incredibly inadequately resourced, right? And then they were using that as a justification to hit us with all these quote-unquote reforms, right? Like reorganization, privatization, charterization, and closure. So 2009, I was working with the Philly Student Union, shout them out, what? I was on the board, and this new thing had come called Imagine 2014. Anybody remember that? Yeah. It was a little walk down memory lane. It was Arlene Ackerman. She was our new superintendent, and Philly Student Union had been doing a lot of political development with their comrades across the country, and especially Chicago. And so they were basically like, hey, adults, since y'all don't have the political analysis, let us lay this out for you. And they did an incredible teach-in. I don't know if was anyone else at that teach-in that Philly Student Union did in 2009? It was really profound. They were basically like, here is the plan. These are the players. There are going to be franchise corporate charters that are here to take us over. Get with it. This is the writing on the wall for Philly. And I realized it was the first moment that I really understood that there was this neoliberal agenda that was about shifting public dollars, public money, into private hands, and that schools were really going to be the front line for a racialized capitalist expansion. And so I was sitting in their office, this is Philly Student Union, who just years before had literally young people put themselves on the line, direct action, because Edison Schools was going to take over our whole school district. They put themselves on the line, they were out there, and I looked around and I said, well, what are teachers doing? Well, our union wasn't doing anything public. Where were teachers in this fight for public ed? So a few of us got together, a small few of us, and we laid out what we believed in. At the beginning, it was really a lot about restorative practices, restorative justice, community control around positive school transformation, non-standardized, culturally relevant curriculum, and pushing for equitable funding for public schools. We called it Teacher Action Group. Hey, that was 10 years ago. And at that same time, 2009, I went to Houston for Free Minds, Free People. Has anybody ever been to a Free Minds, Free People? Yes. This next one is in Minneapolis. You should go, right? Minneapolis, you should go this summer. I did basically a smoke and mirrors job where I was like, yeah, we totally have an organization in Philly called TAG. We're totally real. And I met all these people from Chicago, New York City, the Bay Area, part of this national teacher activist group network, and they said, great, y'all seem awesome, which really we were just being led by Philly Student Union's analysis and history. And so they're like, y'all are great, come be on board. And they really gave us a lot of very quick development that allowed us to put on this conference and do the ITAGs and do the work that we've been doing. I also, at that time, had a conversation with Erica Almiron. She's right over there. Hey! She was the assistant director of Philly Student Union at that time. She's running for city council, and I think she's going to talk to us in a few. And she basically said, she helped me understand TAG's work wasn't about leading one campaign. It was about developing a network of leaders, people who are grounded to the understanding of how white supremacy and capitalism was going to affect our schools. And so that's what we built. And I'm just, we had to make the space where classroom teachers recognized that our work didn't end when the bell rang, that we needed to work on what happened in our classrooms, but we also had to become political actors. And so I'm just so honored to have been a part of this work for the last 10 years, convening people to reconnect to our values and our commitment to humanizing schools and changing our larger world. And I'm just honored to be with this lineage of people here today and with all of you on this next leg of our journey. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Hannah Franz. It's also very humbling and amazing to be sitting on this panel. So I have been with TAG since the beginning, back when I was a struggling after-school and summer camp educator in 2009. And my throwback story is going to be from 2011, when the Renaissance Schools Initiative was in its second year. Raise your hand if you remember that. So the Renaissance Schools Initiative was a part of Ackerman's Imagine 2014. And in 2011, I also graduated from Temple. I majored in education, and my heart is in public education. So I was like, all right, I'm ready to be a public school teacher, only to find that the district had a hiring freeze. So there was no way that I could be a public school teacher after I graduated. So I had to do some reflecting, and then I ended up getting a job at Albany Charter High School, which was a part of the Renaissance Schools Initiative, and that year went from being a public school, two public schools in one building, to one comprehensive charter school, right? So that staff also went from being a part of the PFT to now being non-union educators. So as Ines was talking about, this is a part of the neoliberal attacks that we were seeing, right? This narrative that individualism and student choice always equals success and freedom, right? That students and families need to be thinking only about themselves, that we need to be prioritizing this thing called student choice, which really was just mass language for privatization. And also especially including the attacks against the union. So the Renaissance Schools Initiative meant that they were going to take public schools and turn them either into promise academies or charters. And in 2011, they targeted 18 schools in the Philly School District. So that included Martin Luther King High School, included Germantown High School, which is now closed, West Philly High School, which is still a Promise Academy, and it also included the forced transferring of over 1,000 school staff, right, forcing many of those out of unions. And two schools that were a part of those 18 were Auden Reed High School and Vere Middle School. And they were unique in the 18 because usually, there's the shallow, superficial attempt to get community input. These two schools, they did not even try. They were handed over to Universal companies because of a partnership that the district had with Universal. So this sort of, and so Auden Reed, they had just built this several million dollar building. If you drive by the building, it's still very beautiful. And the school had only been reopened as a public school for 3 years. So it, as Anissa was saying, right, was labeled as failing and handed over to this charter company. And so it sort of typified the plan, taking public money and handing it over to nonprofit or private institutions. And so within this, right, all of these schools being threatened with either charterization or a new structure, many students were walking out, students were protesting. And one teacher within this who was targeted by the district was this teacher, Hope Moffitt. How many of you remember the Hope Moffitt story? Okay, so that got a lot of media attention. She was targeted because they said that she gave tokens to students and let them leave school to participate in these student walkouts, right, and these protests. And she was sent to the rubber room. Raise your hand if you know what the rubber room is. So, rubber room, aka teacher jail, is where school staff who's in some sort of disciplinary proceedings gets sent, right? They're in limbo. They can be there for a few days, they can be there months, they could be there from one school year all the way into the next school year. So Hope Moffitt was sent there, and the few of us who already had relationships, we also happened to be working at the same school. So I was student teaching at Kensington Urban, alongside Anissa over here, and we were like, we need to put the call out to teachers, and we need to protest because they're clearly trying to intimidate teachers and students, and we are not going to stand by and do nothing. So we did that, and word spread really fast. So clearly word was spreading because on the day of the protest, the very person who signed the disciplinary letter for Hope Moffitt, Assistant Superintendent Linda Wayman, she came to our school the day of the protest. So clearly they also, folks at the district were talking, they're like, all right, it seems like a lot of the organizers are working at this one school. So she showed up, she walked into our schools, clearly trying to intimidate us. And
I was intimidated.
and she walked into our schools, and when she left my classroom, so she could give like a red, yellow, or green based on her short walkthrough. She gave me a green, and so that sent the clear message to her that we can teach and organize. And so later that day we had the protest, and around 700 educators, students, and community members showed up. Yeah. Raise your hand if you were there. Hey, okay. And our demands were clear. Here's our flyer. So our demands, we had clear demands demands of a district. We said give students, parents, teachers, and community members a legitimate role in directing school reform in Philadelphia. 2, stop intimidating teachers and students. And 3, have a transparent process of school change. Right? And so it was another moment where we saw that the district clearly does not care about the opinions of those most affected by their decisions. They were going to continue making decisions that were not in our interest. But it was also a moment where we saw that teachers were hungry for spaces to affect education outside of their classrooms, right? We know that we need to be developing awesome lesson plans, but we need to be doing more than that. We need to be organizing with people across our city if we want to have the kind of education that our students deserve.
So hey everybody again, I'm Chris, he, him. I joined TAG in 2012, 2013 from Chester, educated in Chester Upland School District, and you talk about struggles. You said Edison, and it just brought me back to like, oh my God. But I think early in Chester, we were organized with and particularly the Philadelphia Student Union around sort of like school funding across the state. And that was sort of like my first engagement with organizing in Philadelphia. But in 2012, 2013, I was at Penn doing a master's program, and I found this group, and it's people who were sort of like struggling around sort of like impending closure of schools. And there was this formation of study groups. We call them Inquiry to Action groups here. And I think maybe NICOR was the ones who sort of came up with that sort of like framework. NICOR, New York Coalition of Radical Educators. And Inquiry to Action groups, as was mentioned in the video, are sort of like community study groups where we try to partner educators and community groups, activists, organizers, to think about what are the sort of like pressing issues of our time, and how we can collaborate to deepen our knowledge, but also to engage in sort of like public political action around those things. So that was like one of the main spaces that I got in. And up on our timeline, you can see sort of like the year progression of all the many different iTags that we have available. And we have some that are sort of like coming and closing up together this year too. And I see some folks here and in the crowd that are part of them or either running them as well. So we're so grateful, TAG, for your labor, because that is the sort of like the heart and what keeps this sort of like incubator machine going. And I would also sort of like add to that, one of the things that came along with that and working with the sort of like Caucus of Working Educators is that we developed these sort of like summertime book clubs. And I want to say we're in like the fifth year. We're in the fifth. And right now we're taking recommendations for books folks want to do this summer.
We're voting
We're voting now. See? The process is always moving. We're moving. We always moving. Somebody got my book down here. They're rethinking ethnic studies. Okay, sorry. Okay. So yes, and these summer study groups was another way to kind of continue that energy of these incubation spaces and continue it over the summer, where people will come together around sort of like shared text and do the same thing as like an inquiry to action group. But in the true spirit of now, where I'm like writing a lot, I wrote like a nice sort of like motivational way of like talking about what study groups do for TAG. So excuse me if I try to read it from my phone. Right? And I also want to shout out Robin Kelly has this amazing piece called Black Study, Black Struggle. If you're familiar with his work, so I might have just copied and pasted some things from there. But you see. Okay. The study groups are a clarion call to think together, to plan together our resistance and undisciplined assembly. And the impulse to resist is neither involuntary nor solitary. It is a choice made in community, made possible by community, and informed by memory, tradition, and witness. Through study groups, we created our own intellectual communities held together by principle and love. It is in these spaces where the most daring of ideas come through, when we learn how to find the rhythm of revolutionary struggle, make connections to the movements around us, deepen our knowledge through engaging with history, and build up our reserves for self-reflection and community care. We draw on our collective genius to imagine new strategies for freedom, or simply how to navigate the next foolishness that's placed in front of us, which we always know we're running through. So with that being said, I just want to like lift up our study groups and the work that we do there, and invite you all to continue to engage with us. Engage in this voting process for the books that you're going to be participating in this summer. So shout out to study groups.
Hi everybody, my name is Kelly Collins
she, her pronouns. I was a community and parent organizer for a little over a decade before I moved to teaching in 2001. So I came to teaching with a political analysis of what I wanted to do. But it took me a while to get my ass in gear and sign up with TAG. And I will not ever forget that conversation that Anissa and I had at Liberty Choice Diner. Ron Whitehorn was riding me for almost 5 years to get involved with TAG. He said, you gotta talk to this chick Anissa, you gotta talk to Anissa, you gotta talk to Anissa. So I finally sat down and I said, okay, I'm ready, let's go. So that's my personal story into TAG. I think that was 2010. So I was 1 year late to the bandwagon, but I was in Philly teaching. I'm going to talk about the birth of the Caucus of the Working Educators, which, which I liked what Chris said, the rhythm of the revolutionary struggle. I feel like we are carrying on the rhythm of that revolutionary struggle. So the caucus was officially launched in March of 2014 on Pi Day. If you are a math teacher, 314. Yeah. Okay, so we are now 5 years old. But the story actually starts way back in 2009 with the formation of TAG. I'm not going to rehash what you've already said. But for 5 years prior to the launching of the caucus, this is really important that people understand that the caucus was a project of TAG. That it wasn't just a couple individuals who decided to do something. It was an organizational decision within TAG. So we had been organizing around issues that you've all heard about. We were developing ourselves as leaders, we were waging campaigns, we were building relationships with other organizations across the city and the state and the nation, like Anissa said, that share our values and our vision. And TAG members attended conferences and built relationships with folks across, like Anissa talked about, Minneapolis, also Chicago, other places. And after Chicago launched their caucus, the Caucus of Rank and File Educators, CORE, after they challenged, give it up to CORE, yes. So after they challenged their union's leadership and took the reins of the great CTU, they began to bring like-minded folks together from across the country at gatherings. They didn't even call them conferences just then, they were gatherings. So essentially what they were doing was sowing the seeds of revolution within the rank and file of teachers' unions across the country, and TAG members were there. I think, who went to the original? It was Anissa and Larissa and Hanako? I don't know.
In Chicago.
In Chicago, yes. So, and of course we're also here in Philly meeting on a regular basis with the PFT leadership. So a lot of people don't know that before the caucus was formed, we actually were organizing as the organizing committee of TAG, meeting on a regular basis with the PFT leadership, doing our best to move the union from the inside out through rank and file organizing. Well, here's how that went. So we were trying to push the PFT to use its mighty resources, its mighty resources, to wage grassroots campaigns around school funding, layoffs, cutbacks, everything you just heard about, school closures, everything that also still exists today to threaten the very existence of public education. But every single time we took an organizing proposal to the PFT leadership, there was a blanket just thrown over it, every single time. We have to wait to get Jerry's approval on this, so no. Well, we don't have enough time because we're waiting to hear from our lawyers, so no. Or there's not enough time to do that, so no. And then there's, not to mention the fact that we couldn't even communicate with them because they couldn't put stuff in emails. And of course, you couldn't actually get their cell phone numbers. So it was like complete, you all know that. I mean, if you're a PFT member and you have tried to communicate with a staffer, they wouldn't give you their freaking cell phone numbers. It makes no sense. So anyway, so from the big nose to the little nose, we were just met with like one bureaucratic wet blanket after the other. So we felt deflated and de-energized and discouraged, like all the wind had just got sucked out of our sails. And finally, we said, okay, enough is enough. We turned to our friends in Chicago and said, come help us learn how to build a caucus. And they did. They came on March 1st and 2nd in 2014. We did a little underground boot camp. There were 27 of us in the room. Raise your hand if you were in the room. I know many of us are still around, but we were in that room and we decided to go ahead and build a caucus. We thought we were making a 6-month organizing plan going into this boot camp. Turns out we came out 2 weeks later. So we launched the Caucus of Working Educators 2 weeks later, and ever since then we've been organizing, doing the good work, building leaders, educating ourselves. And we will finally be be able to turn our vision into a reality when we win leadership of the PFT in next year. So PFT elections are next year. We're going to get elected in 2020, and then we're going to hear a little bit more about how we're going to change the Philadelphia landscape.
Peace, y'all. My name is Ishmael Jimenez. I teach at Kensington Kappa. My pronouns are he, him. My interaction with TAG actually started off real unique. I actually was invited, I think, to the initial kickoff meeting at the YUC building. You were there? I was there. I also had 2 children under the age of 5. So at that point, I was like hype. I told my wife about it. She's like, yeah, you can't commit to that. I was like, okay. And then another child came in 2011. But then 2013, I was working at Germantown High School, and it was one of the 23 schools that was closed. My commitment to Germantown at the time was I didn't plan to go anywhere else. You know, I lived in the neighborhood. I saw the kids all the time. I used to love like pointing kids out and be like, you cut my class today, man. And that type of level of relationship's real. That's real. So from there, 2013, I was also laid off after the school was closed. And that devastated me. I had already came into the school district with an analysis. I knew if I can just like affect positively one child in 10 years, I did my job. So like I came in there with eyes wide open. So I just didn't know they were like-minded people. And I always kind of sought it out because even when I was in college, the reason why I was at the first TAG meeting was Jim Hardy invited me. And Jim Hardy was a part of one of my organizations that we started off in Temple called RACE, Revolutionary Action for Change Through Education. So he's like, Ishmael, you gotta come to this. This is what we've been talking about. This is the real work. And I was like, yeah, this sounds good. I gotta get home. So in 2013, when I was called back to the school district, I ended up at Kensington Kappa, which I'm still currently at. And my homie, Yasin Muhammad, that we went to graduate school together, and he also was laid off and then brought back to Central. We saw an offering called Black Music as Rebellion, which was facilitated by the great genius Brendan Johns. Yes. I had no idea who he was. Up in his classroom at GAMP, right? GAMP back then. And so we were in his classroom, and me and Yasin was like, this is beautiful. We brought Monique McKinney, who I also worked with at Germantown, who was at Central with Yasin now. And from those conversations, from that Black Music as Rebellion, I remember Brendan coming with the flyer saying, the Caucus of Working Educators is being formed. Here's our first happy hour. I was like, that sounds wonderful. I gotta go home. And from that point forward, the next year, we're like, we have to do, me and Yasin talked from our Black Music as Rebellion. It was like, we need to have one specifically on hip hop. Because hip hop is such a relevant, pertinent subject to our current context. And if we can effectively teach teachers how to teach it in their classroom effectively and also have those nuanced kind of ideas associated with it, plus go over the Black intellectual tradition and genealogy, we could take it to the next level. So we decided next year, and I got permission from my wife, even though we had, I think the 4th one was on the way now. And so I went to the thing, and it was dope, and we started facilitating. We also decided to do a book club that year on the new Jim Crow, which we were averaging like 35, 40 people a session. We had like 6 sessions. And if you've ever been to a book club, you know that's a large session. And from that, it was just like, wow, like I felt my energy, I felt the love. I was brought into the caucus. It was just like I was in the right place at the right time. And I felt this like love and this energy. And then me and Yasin took that and it was like, okay, so how can we look at our current context and our tradition of where we're at now? And this is after the hip hop one. We were like, okay, we both teach African American history, which is a required course in Philadelphia. Let's look at the curriculum. Because we have so many people who teach African American history within the school district that their only knowledge about Black history is like the Jeffersons mixed in with Meek Mill, which is problematic. So we decided that we had to do a curriculum review. We brought together several other people throughout the school district who taught African American history. We also brought in some of the people who were part of the curriculum writing. And then from there, we decided to form an organization called the Philadelphia Black History Collaborative. And the purpose of the Philadelphia And the purpose of the Philadelphia Black History Collaborative is just really to bring the truth back into the classroom. And especially we have a crawl space called African American History Required Course in Philadelphia, where you can be as radical as you want to be, because that's on the ancestors. And we're on their shoulders. And so we're trying to take that message into the community still. We just had our 3rd annual conference. Thank you. And we continue to build and try to bring folks in and engage in critical dialogue so we can learn from the past so we can move forward instead of just like in this cycle of futility. And I think knowing our history starts there. Thank you.
So, hello everyone. My name is Keziah Ridgway. My pronouns are she, her, hers. So I guess like before I go into how I even came into this work, I'm going to share with you guys like what my teaching philosophy is, and it plays a large part in why I am so committed to this work. So teaching is not just a job; it's a vehicle of activism. It is a mentorship, and it's a sacrifice. And that's my philosophy of education. And the reason why I've developed that philosophy of education actually was, one, when I started my history classes, when I got into college, I noticed nobody looked like me. I was always one of one or one of two. And 2, because while I was doing teaching observations, I went back to my old high school. And there was a new teacher, young, vibrant, probably from the suburbs, and she was teaching African American history. No shade. So one of the things she was doing when I came to observe, she was showing a documentary called Gun, Germs, and Steel. And she showed the documentary, and mind you, it's mostly black children in the class, and I'm sitting there observing, and so she asked the question, so after watching this documentary, do you think Africa needed to be colonized by Europeans? And I was just like, oh, this is about to get interesting. And I look and I see all these hands go up, all the kids want to answer, and they're like, ooh, me, most of them were black. And the first kid was like, yeah, it definitely need to be colonized because Europe brought education and universities and roads and hospitals and all the things. And I was just sitting there and I was like, I'm gonna say something, but I also want to pass my class. So I didn't say anything. And that's kind of haunted me ever since because I feel like knowing who I am, my middle name is Sarah. I was named after my grandma. My grandma didn't take no She was from North Carolina, and she always spoke up. And I've been mad at myself ever since. So I take my anger and I push it into my work. And so that is why I teach. And I was actually supposed to start student teaching, and this is like really important to like how I even know what we is. I was actually supposed to student teach in 2015, a couple months after I had my 4th child, who is now 4. And because of postpartum depression, I ended up postponing it and doing it later. And I'm glad that I did because the first time I would have had to do it at another school, and I really wanted Central. And I don't know what was guiding me to do Central, but that's what I wanted to do. So second time around, I ended up getting Central, and from there, I was introduced to my cooperating teacher, who was George Bazanis, but Yasin Muhammad also worked there as well. And so, if anybody knows George, y'all know he's like high energy and crazy, and he's always at 50 million events. And so I was like, okay, this is a part of student teaching, so I'm gonna go. And I started going to all these events, got introduced to WE. And so after student teaching, I was kind of like on the fence about if I really wanted to join WE or not. And Yasin had introduced me about his time to Ishmael because he was like, you're black, he's black, you got 4 kids, he got 4 kids. Y'all should like know each other. And I was like, okay. And so Ishmael was like trying to pull me in, and then he was like, hey, let's go meet up for breakfast, brunch. And I was like, okay, why? And he was like, oh, I just want to talk to you. I think you should be in WE. And, I was like, okay. So anyway, so we ended up meeting, he pulled me in, and what really attracted me to the work was Black Lives Matter Week of Action. But what really pushes me is the fact that I can bring this work into my classroom. I can bring it into my curriculum, and I can right the wrongs of the other teachers who are teaching our children, not about themselves, but about history, about white history, about Eurocentric history. And so for me, Black Lives Matter is so important because it's not just about Black lives, right? Because it's also about Asian lives. It's also about Afro-Latino lives. It's also about Latino lives. It's also about Indigenous people lives. And I bring that into my classroom. And I think and I feel that that is where the work is. That is what's most important. We have such a diverse group of students here in Philadelphia, and they deserve to see themselves reflected not only in their teaching staff, but in their curriculum. And I think moving forward, that is the thing that needs to continue to motivate all of us, regardless of what our race is and what we look like.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Angie Crawford. I'm a teacher at Martin Luther King High School, and I came here as I started off in with Troublemaker Ishmael. We worked at Germantown together, and so I have really good bully friends. So he bullies me into reading books, and bullies me into joining groups and stuff like that, right? I didn't get brunch though, but I joined WE because of the work of around racial justice they were doing. So within that work, I also say this is my 23rd year of teaching, so I've been in this. So racial justice kind of really aligned with what I was already doing. I came into teaching when my first teaching job was at E. Washington Rhodes, and I went there as a student in 8th grade. And when I went back to work as a teacher, half the teaching staff was teachers there when I was a student in 8th grade. So I had an opportunity to be mentored and observed by old school teachers who just did things differently, right? And so the work that racial justice was doing, Caucus was doing, was kind of like I was already trained to do that, but it was already embedded in me anyway to do this work. So out of the caucus, we felt like at some point through caucus and racial justice that Black educators needed their space, right? So we created this infinity group. We had like potluck. Everything is done well over food. So we had potluck, invited folks to my house. We ate, we laughed, and we planned. And from that creation, the Melanated Educators Collective was started. I got all this in here, but I'm not reading all this, it's too much. So part of what we wanted to do was, part of the demands of Black Lives Matter Week, one thing was to recruit Black educators. But we also needed to sustain Black educators because the work that we do, sometimes we come in schools and people just look at it like we're automatically the disciplinarians, and no, we're not. Or we always get the classes with the trouble kids because we can handle them, but that's, it's okay at some point, but do recognize that's not why we're all here to do. So sometimes we didn't have that space to support each other, right? And sometimes you may be in a building, there might be one or few of you. So we decided that we really wanted to come together collectively and bring back pieces even of our collective nature, right? And bringing us collectively to make sure that we go out and to do this work. But not just to recruit educators, not just to sustain educators, but go out into our communities, because our communities, our parents, our students need us as well. And they need to be able to know how to navigate through schools. Because we have to be real with this. That many times our parents walk into schools, they don't feel welcome. People talk at them and not with them. They talk over them, not again with them. And so like you're saying in classes like, well, parents don't care. Yeah, Black parents care. They do care. But we have not created spaces that we show that we care when they enter this building. They want their children to be equally successful as everybody else. So it's part of our task is to make sure that we are building and growing so that we can go out to communities to help parents navigate through this education system that we work in. And we know it's not always easy to navigate or work in as employees, right? But so how does it feel for a parent to navigate a system if they don't really know the language, the lingo, or how that works? So with that in mind, we have started just recently monthly kickbacks. So that means that we're going out to the community this month, in May rather, May 11th, will it be at the Whiteman branch at 78th and Lehigh, doing a monthly kickback and inviting people from the community, parents to come out. And our theme this month is, is college and is it best for everybody? Because parents have questions that navigate. And as a high school parent, as a high school student, high school teacher, right? As a high school teacher, I know that I've had several conversations on phones with parents about why you gotta fill out this FAFSA. I had a kid last year that had 6 scholarships. They couldn't take any of them because their parent wouldn't fill out their FAFSA. And so those are conversations that we need to walk like old school teachers did, go into the communities and build relationships with parents in our communities. And we know that our schools aren't really traditional schools where everybody that lives in the neighborhood goes to your school, but we have to find other ways. So we have free libraries in Philadelphia, there's a branch just about every section of the city. So we are going to use those spaces to reach out to parents in the community to say, hey, this is what we're talking about this month. Come out so we can start building relationships with parents, letting them know that, there's an opt-out portion for Keystones and PSSA. What is the purpose of these standardized tests? Because parents don't know. All schools tell them is they need to take this test. But why? And then schools also use punitive measures when kids don't want to take the test. So they need to be educated about that, equally as well about what's actually going on, about, the mouse poo and the falling ceilings, the lack of resources, or them pulling people out to school, that there's no type of trauma-informed education being happening in school. Parents don't know that. They think there's counselors in the school and that they're supposed to do certain things, but they don't really know. So we're taking it back to before Brown versus Board of Education, when teachers lived in their neighborhoods and people in the community knew what was going on. We kind of want to remix that version of it, right? And make sure that we're in the community and start building relationships with community. Go where the parents are. So if the parents at the Little League games, we need to be at the Little League games. If the parents at the fish fry, we need to be at the fish fry. If the parents at the basketball practice or the hockey practice, we need to be there because that's where the parents are. And we have to sometimes realize that parents are not coming to the schools because we don't make them feel welcome. So we have to change that narrative and do that work. So that's part of what the work that we're doing. So last September, we had our first annual conference. We are proud to announce we're having our second annual conference. And that'll be September the 21st, 2019, so mark your calendars. And I'm proud to announce that our keynote speaker is Bettina Love. So Bettina Love is from out the University of Georgia. If you're familiar with the book, we want to do more than survive, which just recently came out a few months back. She is the author of that. And I think she's been nominated in the summer book group, so lots of times probably. So if you want to know more about that or read that book, make sure you vote for it so it can happen and read it. Come out to the conference for that event. And yeah, I'm done. And I gotta make sure I tell it. Our website is www.melanatoreducatorscollective.com.
All right, how's everyone feeling? Good. Thank you so much to our panel of speakers. Thank you so much, each of you, for speaking.
That is just a small sampling of the immense work that has been done, created from, formed with TAG in the last 10 years.